All right, welcome to our first e-learning lecture over our ArtTalk textbook. So we're going to look at chapters 1, lesson 1 and 2 today. All right, so our vocab, right? We've got artwork and the word perceive. So what is artwork? Well, it's really any visual expression of an idea or experience created with skill. So really, we get very philosophical about this, but the idea here is that it's anything that can be visually shown, that someone took the time, made a plan, and crafted with care. And then to perceive, right? If we perceive something, we are aware of it. We understand it. We can see it. We can talk about it. So we become deeply aware through our senses, sight, sound, smell, those kind of things, of the special nature of a visual object. All right. So purposes of art. So we have all these different functions, so let's break those down and see what they are. The personal function really is about expressing personal feelings, right? So here, in The Sick Child, we have a painting, about a child who's sick and dying, maybe having their last breath. So really what the artist here is trying to get us to respond to is, right, this mother, kind of crying over her sick child, right? It's mostly about our response to the painting, how it makes us feel. Our social function, right, is about expressing community. So here we have an image of a man wearing a kente cloth from Ghana, which is a specially woven traditional piece of garment from Ghana in Africa. That's used in special ceremonies and stuff. So making a kente cloth, usually done by hand. So there's that craft that goes into it to make it an artwork. And it's recognized to promote different social status, celebration. So if people are getting married, they often wear kente cloth. So sometimes our artwork is meant to celebrate community, to celebrate who we are, right? There's a purpose behind it in how we relate to others. And then we have the spiritual function, right? The creation of Adam. It's a very familiar piece that we've probably seen parts of in the Sistine Chapel. So obviously we have the spiritual function, right? Something that expresses a religion, a faith, a higher power. So here we're really talking about things used for rituals, used for explaining stories for different religious reasons. Just things about religion in general, right? So that all comes back to our spiritual function. Our physical function, this one is cool because it's all about functional art. So lots of different things can come out of this, but the idea is that the art is full of purpose. So here we picked up the flying buttress in our architecture, which are these guys right here. And the whole point of the flying buttress is to support the structure in the middle so that it doesn't fall over, fall apart, that kind of thing. So that would be an example of our functional art, right? It has a purpose to it. You might think of a belt as functional art, right? Physical art. It's meant to keep your pants up, but that doesn't mean it can't be fashionable. All right, and here, among the Sierra Nevada, educational art. One thing I love about educational art is that it doesn't necessarily need to seem educational on the surface, right? It doesn't need to be a boring piece of artwork meant to explain something to a class. Here, there was an entire group of artists who were sent out into the Wild West, the frontier unconquered, for no other reason than to paint what they saw and bring it back to show people what America looked like. It was about inspiring people to understand the beauty of our nation, to take pride in our natural environment that we had here. With the light, the way it's shining it is, it was a connection to spirituality as well. And it became really a catalog for what the environment looked like at that specific time. So educational art, right, is just about educating the viewer on something, right? We know that in the 1860s, this is what the Sierra Nevada looked like, right? We can compare it to photographs we have today because that's not something that they had back then. So we're just trying to show the viewer something that they haven't seen before. Art from the past is very educational because it gives us a glimpse into what it was like to live in the past. So even if it didn't have the intention of being educational when it was made, it can still become educational. All right, so here we have a picture of a frontier woman. Well, not frontier, I guess I should say a rural, probably somewhere in like the Midwest, woman with her family during the Great Depression, right? So which functions do you think apply? We've got personal, social, spiritual, physical, and emotional, right? We have a migrant mother in 1936. Go ahead and take a moment, pause the video, jot down some thoughts. Okay, so I would say we could definitely hit a bunch of these, right? Personal, what is it meant to be connecting to? Well, here we have a mother who's clearly tired. She's worn down. She's holding a baby in her hands. Her clothes are torn and stained. She just looks very tired. Her nails are dirty. And then both of her kids look like they've been like playing in dirt, right? Their hair doesn't necessarily look clean. And they are facing away from the camera, right? All we're focusing on is her face for that expression. And it's one that's very tired, right? So it's evoking that idea of family, of struggle, of hardship. We know based on how this was framed, right, that this woman is going through a hard time. So it's eliciting that idea of family, of suffering within us. Social, right? We're not necessarily using it to commemorate anything or celebrate, but it could be meant to show the perseverance of human strength, right? How much we're willing to go through and struggle, what the Great Depression was like. I don't know that I can make an argument for spiritual. I don't know that it's necessarily about a higher power. Physical, it doesn't necessarily have a function to it beyond being a photograph. But educational, it could definitely be used as an educational piece, right? It could function that way because right now maybe you're learning what people dressed like during the Great Depression, what it was like to be a mother of 3 children during a time that really people didn't have a lot, especially out on the frontier. We focus a lot on what urban living looked like during the Great Depression, not necessarily what it looked like in small town, rural America. All right, let's move on to lesson 2. All right, so vocabulary. We've got folk artists. Those are the artists who are self-taught and have little to no formal schooling in art methods. We also call them outsider artists. So these are the people who aren't taking art classes maybe beyond high school art or advanced level art. They're teaching themselves. They're learning from other artists. They're out just experimenting. There's not like a traditional path that they're taking. And then we have artists. This specific definition is really talking about visual artists. So these are creative individuals who use imagination and skill to communicate in visual forms, right? So there are people who are making visual work meant to communicate something. And then an action painting, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but it's the technique of dripping and splashing paint onto a canvas stretched onto the floor. All right, inspiration of art, right? Our muse. Where do we get our muse from? So this first one that I've got is Summer Surf by Frank Dudley. And if this, scenery here looks familiar, it's very possible that you've seen exactly what's painted here because this guy is famous for painting our national dunes here on the Indiana National Lakeshore. So we can draw our inspiration from nature. We go out, we are inspired by its beauty, we're inspired by its function, its colors, its texture, whatever it is, we can always find solace in nature and use that to paint. Real world events and real people are often inspiration. Here we have Guernica by Pablo Picasso. There we go. And here what he's talking about is during the Spanish Civil War, Nazi planes bombed the city of Guernica, killing and wounding hundreds of civilians in the process. I am told that when you see this painting, which is absolutely gigantic, I'm told a person would be maybe this tall in the painting. It's very, very large. It talks about the struggle, right? Here we can see a woman, right, gripping her probably dead child. Here we see a man underneath maybe what might be a horse being stepped on. Over here, right, this man is obviously in pain. We've got animals howling. It's a very sympathetic piece to the people who were killed and wounded. It talks really about the pain and suffering of the people during the Spanish Civil War. So we can inspire a lot from real world events. Another inspiration we can have is spiritual and religious beliefs, right? A lot of artwork that's made for sumo wrestling is actually based in religion. It is I have this written down, the Shinto religion, one of the largest ones over in Japan. So here, their highest ranking sumo wrestler, called a yokozuna, wear the special mawashi, right, which is all this here, that have these 5 little zigzag folded paper stripes that hang off of not only his little rope thing, but from Shinto shrines. The mawashis themselves are made by highly skilled weavers who hand weave the finest silk in Japan, right? It can take months to weave all of this by hand. So sometimes art is created out of that spiritual need or religious belief. We can make art for creative techniques. I call it art for art's sake. Jackson Pollock became famous for this because his art was much more about the process of creating artwork than it was necessarily the final product. This is where that action painting comes in. Here you can see that he's just really throwing that paint onto the canvas, and part of what is the art is how it's made. It's the movement you're capturing with the paint, how it's choosing to fall. Now, while the artist is intentionally making choices, the work itself is almost creating itself. So it's kind of like a meta art technique that we're looking into here. All right. Myths and legends, right, is a great source of inspiration. We've got tons of that happening all the time. This one is by Artisma Henteleschi. And it's Judith slaying Holofernes, right? So we've got the story of Judith who snuck in to a camp under the guise of being a woman, basically, who ended up killing the general, is I think how the story goes. So here we have that depicted. Obviously, you can get commissioned work, right? So Diego Velázquez was commissioned to paint this piece of Spanish royalty, and commissions how a lot of artists make their money. It happens today. It happened hundreds of years ago. It happened thousands of years ago, right? We have constantly lived in a world where people want art and they are willing to pay for it. And this is supposed to say here, not commission work again, but work based off the past. So this is the same painting here, but Pablo Picasso repainted it in his style. All right, so that is the end of our slideshow. Make sure that you guys are also doing the reading for chapter 1, lesson 1 and 2, so that you're prepared for our quiz later today. All right, see you soon.